Today we're going to look at solving quadratic equations by factoring when our a value is greater than 1. When our a value is greater than 1, that means we have a number in front of x squared. In order to solve these equations by factoring, we are going to be using the zero product property to find those x-intercepts or our solutions to the quadratic equation. So let's look at our first example. 2x squared minus 7x minus 15, and I'm going to put an equals 0 at the end, because in order to solve a quadratic equation, it needs to be set equal to 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called the slip and slide method, where you have 3 steps. You slide and multiply, you divide, and then you move the bottoms up. So our first step is to slide. We're going to slide that 2 over onto the 15. Because I have an a value in front of my x squared, we need to move that in order so we can factor it. So when I multiply that, when I slide, I have to multiply. So my equation will turn into x squared minus 7x minus, well, 2 times 15 is 30. After I do that, I can factor just like with the other types of equations when we had an a equals 1 value. So I'm going to draw my x, or in some of your teachers might have had you draw a diamond, and we're going to see the two numbers. When I multiply them, I get negative 30, and when I add them, I get negative 7. When I see that there's a negative on the bottom, I know that my larger number is going to have to be negative. So let's see what values will multiply to give me negative 30 and add to give me negative 7. Well, I know 1 times 30 is 30, but is 1 plus negative 30 negative 7? No, that doesn't work. Well, I also know that 2 times 15 is 30. And again, let's make that larger number negative. Is 2 plus negative 15 negative 7? No. How about 3 times negative 10? Is 3 plus negative 10 negative 7? And it is. So my two values are going to be 3 and negative 7. So we write those in parentheses. X plus 3. Oops, sorry, I made an error there. Negative 10. X minus 10. Now, I did the slide and factor. Now we have to divide. And in order to do that, I look back up here. I slid this 2 over. So we need to undo that. When I slid, I multiplied. So now we're going to divide each of these values by 2. And what I want to see is if when I divide these, I get a whole number, or if I can simplify my fractions. Well, 3 divided by 2 gives me a decimal, and that's the simplest form of my fractions. So I'm just going to keep that 3 over 2 for now. 10 divided by 2, I know is 5. So we did slide, we did divide. Now we are going to move the bottoms up. Because I don't like a fraction in factored form, I'm going to take the bottom of my fraction and move it up in front of my x. So my new value is now 2x plus 3, or my new factor, I'm sorry, is 2x plus 3. Second one stays x minus 5, and that will equal 0. So I just factored a quadratic equation with an a value that's bigger than 1, with a number in front of my x squared. The last step in order to solve these equations is we need to set each of these equal to 0. This is called the zero product property. So when I do that, I'm going to take each of these factors and set them equal to 0. So I'm going to have 2x plus 3 equals 0. And I'm also going to have x minus 5 equals 0. In order to find those x-intercepts or the solutions to this quadratic equation, I just need to solve now. So if I were solving this first equation, 2x plus 3 equals 0, the first thing you would do is subtract the 3. So 2x equals negative 3, and divide by 2. I get negative 3 halves. In the second equation, in order to solve for x, all I need to do is add 5. And I get x equals negative 5. Those would be the two solutions to this quadratic equation. X equals negative 3 halves and x equals negative 5 are my two x-intercepts. So let's look at another example. We're going to solve this equation. 4x squared minus 8x equals 5. Well, this one looks a little different from the first one because in our first equation we had equals 0, which we don't have here, but we do need it. So in order to be able to factor this, we need to make the right-hand side 0. Well, I've got a positive 5 over here. The opposite of a positive 5 would be a negative 5 or a minus 5. So those would cancel out. And on the left-hand side, I would have 4x squared minus 8x minus 5 equals 0. Now I have my equation set equal to 0. So then we can start our factoring process, which again, we need to slide, then factor. We will need to divide, and then we will need to move the bottoms up. So let's do that first step, which was to slide. So let's take this 4 and slide it over. When we slide, don't forget, we multiply. So my new equation will be x squared minus 8x, and 4 times 5 would be 20. So we factor what multiplies to negative 20 and adds to negative 8. So let's think again. Our larger number is going to have to be negative since we add to a negative. So is 1 times negative 20 is negative 20, but is 1 plus negative 20 negative 8? No. How about 2 times negative 10? Is 2 plus negative 10 negative 8? Yes. So my values will be 2 and negative 10. We rewrite this in parentheses, x plus 2, x minus 10. Now that I'm done with this step, I need to divide. And again, we look up here and saw that I slid over a 4, so I need to divide by 4. 2 divided by 4 is a decimal, 10 divided by 4 is a decimal. I can simplify both of these fractions. 2/4, well, I can divide both of those by 2, and I get 1/2. 10/4, I can divide both of those by 2 and get 5/2. So now my fractions are in simplest form. And the last step would be to move the bottoms up. So I'm going to take this 2 and move it in front of the x, and this 2 and move it in front of the x. So my factors are going to be 2x plus 1 and 2x minus 5. So I've effectively factored my equation, but now we need to solve them. So we need to set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve. So in this equation, I'm going to subtract 1 first to get 2x equals -1 and divide by 2. So x will equal -1/2. The second one, I'm going to start by adding 5, divide by 2, and x will equal 5/2, or if you want to simplify that, you could just simplify that to 2.5. So your two x-intercepts, your two solutions, are -1/2 and 2.5.